a spaceship that I'm waiting for. I'm flying up to the stars.
So I grew up in a really, really, really small town in southern Indiana, Bedford, Indiana.
Okay.
I'm the oldest of 4 kids. My dad was a school teacher. My mom was a dental hygienist. I think I've always been very patriotic. Have always been interested in aviation, was very interested in space as well when I was really little. And I can't even tell you now how I found out about it, but I knew about the Air Force Academy. So I went to visit the Air Force Academy when I was a junior in high school, and then a friend of ours was talking to my parents one day and said, well, if she's interested in service academies, you should take her to Annapolis too, and see what you think about that. So visited Annapolis later and loved Annapolis. I mean, not that I didn't love the Air Force Academy, but they're just a very different feel looking, going to one versus the other.
Annapolis is Navy, right?
Yes. And I am of the generation that was, in that pivotal, 12-year-old or so age when Top Gun came out. So,
right.
And the funny thing about that is at the time, and the whole time that we were at the Naval Academy, you would have never, ever, ever said, "Oh, I was inspired by watching Top Gun,"
really?
Because that would have been such a dumb and cliche thing to say. But then 30 years later, or almost 30 years later, Maverick comes out, and then all of a sudden, all these people who would have never said that are now like, "Oh my gosh, I got interested in aviation when I saw Top Gun for the first time." So it's funny in retrospect, but
so when you joined the Navy, you hoped to fly jets? That was.
I don't know that I necessarily hoped to fly jets, but I just wanted to. I was interested in aviation in general, and of course, like everybody wants to fly jets.
Yeah.
But while we were at school, some of the older people in our company came back to visit or did a fly-in or whatever. And, to hear them talk of people who were going through the rotary wing pipeline, it was funny. They'd be like, helicopters are so much better than jets. You can literally just land it right over there and get out and do whatever. So, in flight school, you start out flying fixed wing. We fly about 200 hours in a fixed wing trainer. And then at that point, you either, go into props or jets or helicopters.
Right.
So you get exposure to fixed wing to begin with.
Okay. So you started with the fixed wing, and then what made you decide to, since at that point you could, I'm assuming you kind of have the options of going fixed wing, with the jets or into the helicopters. What sent you to the helicopter route?
They each have their cool aspects, I guess. You
right.
can go, what is the line from Top Gun, like Mach 2 with your hair on fire in a jet, but then helicopter flying is. It's a lot more dynamic in that you're have everything in control of everything at all times. It's
right.
not like you're just not getting up to altitude and just droning until you have to get
yeah.
until you get to wherever you're getting to.
Well, but what is for you the most interesting thing about flying a helicopter?
It's almost like it's an extension of you. I liked being, we flew in, around Southern California a lot, and then I was stationed in Hawaii, so I've flown a ton around Hawaii. It's just, it's more scenic, it's more exciting, I guess, because you can, you're just so all, close to the ground and along the nap of the earth and that kind of thing. And there's so many different mission sets that go along with flying helicopters. Each helicopter has various missions, but even within one, you're taking things back and forth, which isn't super exciting, but the people who are getting the things depend on the things that you're getting, or you're doing right. anti-submarine warfare, or you're doing anti-surface warfare, or you're doing search and rescue, or you're doing, in the reserve squadron I was in, we did towards the end of the time that I was there, we did a lot of special ops support. So fast roping or, going up to altitude and SEALs jumping out of the back. And so, there's just so many different things that you can do.
Right.
So it keeps it interesting.
What kind of helicopters did you fly?
So I started out in the SH-60 Bravo, in HSL 37 out in Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii. And again, that was primarily anti-submarine warfare, anti-surface warfare for the missions for that. And then when I left active duty and was in the reserves, I flew the UH-3 for 1 year in HC 85 at North Island in San Diego, California. And then during that year, we were transitioning from the H-3 to the MH-60 Sierra, which is the same airframe. It's a Black Hawk airframe, but the Navy variant of it,
right,
or one of the Navy variants of it. And it's mostly logistics type stuff. It looks more like on the inside like a Black Hawk than the one that, because the SH-60 Bravo. The inside of it is really tight. You can't fit very many people in the back because it's all like acoustics and all of the equipment to support the anti-submarine warfare mission. But then in the Sierra, it's just a truck basically. It's just all hollowed out on the inside. You can put a bunch of troop seats in there or a bunch of stuff in there or whatever. Yeah. So one of the cool missions that we did so transition to the MH-60 Sierra, and then the squadron transitioned to an HSC squadron instead of an HC squadron. So, and the primary mission at the beginning of the time that I was there was supporting operations that take place out on San Clemente Island, so right off the coast of Los Angeles. It's about a 1 hour flight from San Diego. And we stayed really busy. I think we probably had missions every week of the year with the exception of holidays maybe. And we would support torpedo exercises for the MH-60 Romeo squadrons and P-3s, all the aircraft that drop torpedoes. So we would be out there for a week. We would launch the noisemaker things that were going to be the simulated submarines, and then they'd shoot their torpedoes, and then we would go out there and pick up the torpedoes out of the water. So we would do that. Stayed very busy doing that. We would do another thing that we do just by virtue of being in San Diego, because San Diego or Southern California, with the big fire problem that they have out there. We did have a couple of different firefighting missions while I was out there, so that was kind of wild, especially for people who we all, or most of us, lived there. So several of us had already evacuated our own houses, but then we're going and using the Bambi buckets to pick up water out of the the lakes or the bodies of water around there, and then going and you're dropping them on the fire lines over where Cal Fire had basically set everything up. So that was really pretty wild because we were out there. There would be a couple of from our squadron, but then Cal Fire helicopters and some others from other places, and you just set up this daisy chain of, one guy dips, takes off, drops, and it's just this big circle, and that was pretty crazy because, there was smoke all over the place, and you've got all these aircraft you aren't used to operating in and amongst each other, and sometimes you've got people talking on different radio frequencies, so it was a little hairy, but it was, it was exciting.
It sounds like a little bit like in the old days when they would just pass buckets, where they were just making a line to pass the buckets to douse the fire. Like it almost sounds a little bit like that.
So we did that for, I think, about a week in 2007. We had some pretty good fires out there that year.
Is there anything anything exciting or neat that you did while you were in the Navy proper that you can share?
When I was still at HSL 37, that was when they filmed Jurassic Park 3 out on Kauai. So we were stationed on Oahu, but they were filming the movie on Kauai, and we flew in support of that. So if you watch Jurassic Park 3, there's helicopters at the end that come in and rescue everybody and fly away, and that was
that was your squad.
That was our squadron. We flew that. It was wild. That was really fun. But I've had a lot of different roles in the Navy, which, it's funny because, hindsight is 20/20, obviously. Right. I left active duty in 2005 because, I was married and we wanted to start a family. And I didn't, at the time, not that people weren't doing it, but I think maybe just because I didn't know anybody that had done it, or at least didn't know anybody that had done it successfully, people who stayed, or women at least, stayed on active duty and had families. Because, deploying and leaving small kids at home was, I was just like, oh, I don't think I can do that.
It's tough.
That seems, it would be very hard, whatever, but it would be hard on both ends, I guess.
Yeah.
But so I left active duty, joined the reserves. The reserves were fantastic. I'm so thankful that I did that. Of course, there's always that, maybe I could have stayed on, after I saw other people starting to do it and doing it successfully, I'm like, maybe I could have done that. Oh, well, I didn't do it, so it doesn't matter. But I had a very, very fulfilling reserve career and definitely did things that I wouldn't have done had I stayed on active duty. So like I said, I flew at HSC 85 for 5 years, and then we moved here. And at the time, like I was saying earlier, you have to, even in the reserve, you have to maintain the same flight minimums as the people on active duty do. And that was not going to be possible going all the way from here, all the way back to San Diego.
Right.
Once a month or multiple times a month in order to do that. So at that point in time, I had to find another job.
What brought you to Huntsville?
So my husband was an FBI agent. And his first duty station in the FBI. He was a Marine before that. Mm-hmm. And then we were in San Diego for 5 years with the FBI. I was fortunate that he was able to get that at his first FBI assignment, because that set me up perfectly for being in the reserves and being in the squadron, like I said, that I was out there. But then after 5 years, an opportunity came here that really read like his resume. It was, criminal, Spanish speaker, all these other things that sounded like, the stuff that he had been doing and was familiar with. Right. So he came to me one day and he was like, well, what do you think about moving to Alabama? And we're in Southern California, and people who live in Southern California think that no place else in the world exists except for Southern California. Right. So, and we loved it there, and we lived on Coronado Island, and it was just like Mayberry out there, but it's also very, very expensive. And I had just had, something happen in my civilian job at the time that kind of like was a little bit jarring. I mean, it was one of those things, where somebody just got fired for no reason. Right. So it was kind of like, wow, maybe this whole situation I've got here isn't as stable as what I thought it was. Yeah. So he was like, well, I'm going to go check it out. I'm going to see if we can live in Huntsville, Alabama, because neither one of us had ever been here at that point. So he came out and he was like, I think it's okay. Why don't we both go and see? So we both came out and we're like, yeah, this is kind of a neat place. And we were only here for a couple of days, but saw enough that we thought, okay, yeah, I think I can do that. And of course we go back to California and everybody's like, what in the world are you talking about?
Yeah. California to Alabama is it's a surprise, right?
Well, you think it's going to be this big culture shock. It really wasn't. I mean, because it just isn't.
It's just not, another place.
Right. It is just another place. And moving wasn't that big of a deal because we were kind of used to it at that point. We had been in and around the military. And our kids were little, so it wasn't like they were going to be devastated because we were pulling them away from all their family or all of their friends. And all of their friends were military, so all their friends were going to be leaving at some point in time soon anyway. Sure. So none of that seemed like it was going to be a big deal. I just found another job in the reserves. There's they have periodic boards of these are the jobs that are available, and you just apply for those jobs. And I didn't know anything about the rest of the reserves. Aviation is its own kind of like enclave, and most people just stay in that until they retire. So even all of the people who were senior to me in my squadron had only ever just done that. So it wasn't like there was anybody I could talk to about it really. So that was kind of a just figuring it out sort of thing. But I found another job that was also in San Diego, but it wasn't going to require as frequent a trip as was required by being in the squadron. And then ironically, after I had been there for about 2 years, I show up on this involuntary mobilization list. So after I had left active duty because I couldn't imagine deploying with little kids, I ended up doing it anyway. So that was a little bit jarring. So that was in 2013, end of 2012. when I showed up on this list. You know, and at that point I have, let's see, I had like an 8-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 2-year-old. So
Right.
I was going to be officer in charge of a Scan Eagle detachment. So Scan Eagle is just, you know, it's a drone that's about this big, 50 pounds or so, and it's just intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance. So it's, you know, just flying around and taking pictures and video and
So they have real,
and that kind of
they
stuff.
have real pilots come in to like kind of virtual pilot the drones from afar.
So yes and no.
Okay.
So there were a couple of different UAVs that were in country at the time, and some of them. So the one that I was with, we had all civilian operators, and then my job was to be the like to kind of ride herd over all of those folks, and then be the liaison between them, and then the customer of the
Right.
product that we were going to have.
Okay.
You know, there were other ones where, you know, they did have pilots being the sensor operators also, but that wasn't one of the ones that I was in. But yeah, so I went to Afghanistan, and originally it was supposed to be 365 days boots on ground, and there was, you know, 3 months of workups prior to that, because, you know, learning how to deal with the Scan Eagle, like what all
Right.
that was about. 5 weeks at Fort Dix, New Jersey, and then, you know, and then a couple of weeks of just getting activated, which is a process in and of itself. So I left home on January 2nd of 2014 and wasn't supposed to be back until, I think the plan was that I would be back around Christmas of the next year. When we landed in Afghanistan in March, after having done all of this preparatory training in order to go, we learned that, you know, at that time, President Obama had basically said, I want boots on ground in Afghanistan below 10,000 by the end of the calendar year. So they were just kind of scrambling to try to figure out how to get below that threshold.
Right.
And it just so happened that when I got there, I found out that the FOB that I was on, so forward operating base, so not like a great big Bagram or Kandahar, but like this pretty small little base.
Yeah.
There was about an hour's flight outside of Kandahar was where I was in Kalat province. So when I got there, I found out I was only going to be there for probably 3 months or something. So, and then literally they were dismantling the base. Every day you would walk out and something else would be gone. And at that point in time, they were talking about just moving our debt someplace else, moving it to Kandahar, moving it somewhere. And then we ended up just like, they didn't need us because they already had one in Kandahar. They already had one here, you know, wherever. And so they sent everybody home.
That's nice. At least you weren't gone as long as you thought.
Right. I mean, it was super hard to be, it was very hard to be away from home. It was probably harder for me than it was for the kids because they were little. We had the benefit of FaceTime, you know, iPhones,
Right.
the whole 9 yards. So that, I mean, deploying, being gone for that long, 20 years earlier would have been unbelievable. But, you know, I saw them on FaceTime every day, and I'm sure, you know, at some point they were kind of like, oh, it's Mom again. You know, I saw you yesterday. But
Right. Right.
so, and, you know, at this point, that was 11 years ago, or I don't even know that any of them even remember it. Of course, I remember it.
Right.
But at the time. And, you know, my husband was an FBI agent at the time, which is no small feat and no pushover of a job, obviously.
A time-consuming career as well.
A very time-consuming career, very demanding, and was, you know, up to that point, any minute of the day, hey, we got a thing, and he's running off to do, you know what I mean? So just leaving that situation the way it was, I was kind of like, okay, I'm sorry. You got it. Navy's
Right.
calling. I got to go. And, I mean, it was not that I didn't think he was going to be able to handle it, because of course he was going to be able to handle
Right.
it. But the way he handled it was just amazing.
Yeah. That's good. Kids are good today?
They're fine.
All right.
So far as I can tell. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
That's good. That's
But just
wonderful.
and it was funny because at the time, somebody that I know wrote a book, married to an Army infantry officer, wrote a book about how, the war at home is some of the war that only women can do, this, that, and other. And I took real issue with that
Sure.
because of the way my husband handled being the stay-at-home person.
Yeah.
And the stay-at-home person, not as a stay-at-home person. Like, he had a legitimate job, and I was just like, you need to be giving credit where credit is due. Like, I get that it's, the person at home is definitely fighting their own war, if you will, but it's not one that only women can do.
Yeah.
Like, you got the right husband, and they're going to kill it. I mean, I'm 100% positive he did a way better job of that role than I would have done if the tables had been turned. But, yeah, he did an amazing job.
That's great.
Dealing with 3 little kids while I was gone for
Yeah. So
that
when
period of time.
when you came back, what did you end up doing?
So I came back in summer of 2014, and I came back to my same civilian job. Like I was telling you earlier, my boss and I just kind of like swapped mobilizations. Like, he left and then I took over, and then and then I was getting ready to leave, so he came back, and then he took over again, and we just kind of, so I went back to that same civilian job, and then I just had a different reserve job when I got back. Okay. That was, I certainly didn't look forward to leaving my family to go
Right.
to a war zone, without having any idea what was going on, and the separation and all of the things that go along with that kind of a situation. But it was really a fantastic experience. All of that aside, like, I really, and the funny thing about that too is the person that I relieved sat me down before he left, and he was like, "These guys are a bunch of trouble. They've caused me a bunch of problems. You're really walking into a mess here with this crew that you're going to be dealing with." And they were fantastic.
Huh.
I mean, he was clearly the problem.
Right.
The solid bunch of guys. They were awesome. I'm still in contact with all of them.
Wow.
And yeah, they were all, they were civilian, but they were all prior military except for one of them. Fun bunch of guys. It was really great. And you get into this routine anyway, because you're only taking care of yourself and then doing your job. It's kind of like a Groundhog Day situation. It's like, I wake up at 6, I go work out, I go to the thing for 3 hours, I go to a meeting, I go to lunch, I go back, I come back.
Yeah.
It's a very scripted day, which makes that part of it easy, at least.
Sure.
So,
Yeah. So you came back, you went back to your old job, but then at some point you've ended up with Pinnacle Solutions, which we've had Duke and Tina Tucker on the show in the past. So how did you end up with Pinnacle Solutions, and what is your role there today?
So I had been at my previous job for 10 years. I just kind of was ready for the next step, I guess. So I stayed with that. I mean, I was very fortunate in that job that the job was here, but then we moved to Hawaii, and then we moved to Virginia, and then we moved back here, and I had a lot of flexibility and trust from my boss that this was before before teleworking was a thing, but really, but enough trust and flexibility that I could keep that job and move it to Hawaii and move it to Virginia. And I came back here quite a bit to, tag up and to just be in the office and face-to-face with folks every once in a while. But just the flexibility to be able to do that and keep that job and, keep a job was fantastic. But I knew that when we eventually made it back here, I was I had kind of been doing the same thing for the most part for those 10 years. So I wasn't really progressing from a career standpoint. So once we got back here and got established, I knew that needed to happen for me. So like I said, for all the civilian jobs I'd had before that, it was just kind of like, oh, I knew somebody who had a job available. This was the first time I was really going to have to actually go look for a job and then actually apply for it. And those were not things that I really knew how to do. So that was kind of interesting. But I had the benefit of there's this organization called Your Next Mission. So it's basically helping veterans, but not even veterans. Like I'll get to what I mean by that in a minute, but helping veterans, with resumes and headshots and whatever, things that you need in order to take the next step, to find your next mission. And there was, I think it was Space and Missile Defense trade show 3 years ago now at the Von Braun Center, and they had this Your Next Mission thing that was kind of associated with it. So it was kind of a job fair on the side of this huge trade show that we have every year. And I met the recruiter from Pinnacle there, and at the time she was like, well, she took my resume. Well, we have, I don't think we have any PM jobs right now, but I'll give you one. She was super nice. And so that's kind of how I got connected with Pinnacle. And then, so they didn't have anything available at the time, but then she called me just like a couple of weeks later and was like, hey, I talked to the vice president of engineering. He would like to talk to you. So that's how that whole thing happened.
So what do you do at Pinnacle then?
So I manage all of the virtual training products and programs.
So you're kind of back in the aviation realm again.
Yes. So, and that has been one common thread through all of the civilian jobs I've had, was that they've all had some kind of an aviation thing. Some of them have been training related, some of them have been, like the data analysis related, like the last job that I had, but all of them have been aviation related. So I really don't know if I would even know how to do another job, but that's what I'm passionate about. I'm not in the Navy anymore. I retired March of 24. But that's still where my heart is. Like I still want to, help that community and do whatever I can from this side to make their lives easier or better or, whatever.
Have any of your kids considered or went into the military?
In the least bit interested at all. Okay. It's funny because my husband and I both went to the Naval Academy. And, we lived back there when our oldest was little until he was 2. So he was there all the time, but, he doesn't remember it from being 2. But, we've gone back a lot for reunions and just, we lived, back when we lived in Virginia, we were really close by. So we would go up to football games and the whole nine. And we have some really good friends that live in the area. And they just, I don't know if they've just heard us tell too many horror stories or what. But,
sure.
But it's funny because we have other, friends who like all of their kids are going to the academy, or at least one has. We're just like, what did we do wrong that our kids are not interested? But
they all follow their own path.
They're doing their own thing. That's right. They're doing their own thing. And we have one that just graduated from college, and he's doing he's got a great job. Well, and that was actually what I was going to say about that Your Next Mission. So it's for veterans, but it's also for dependents. So our son graduated from Auburn in May, and they had a Your Next Mission at Quad A in Nashville a week after he graduated. So because he's a dependent, he was eligible to go up there and go through the trade, go through the Your Next Mission part of it, but then also walk the trade show floor. So you can just walk up to anybody and say, here's my resume, let's have a conversation or whatever. And he met somebody there who took a shining to him. And the market for computer science majors right now, we've been telling these kids that it's all about STEM, it's all about tech. This is what you got to be doing in college and studying, and that's the only way we're going to have a job when you graduate. The market for them is really hard right now. It's really hard.
Yeah.
And, he met that one man who has really shepherded him through the process over the summer. And even when Jake, our son, was like, I don't think this job is going to be for me, that guy was like, nope, you got to just go through the whole process. Just go through the whole process, and when you get to the end, if you think it's not for you, then that's fair. But just go through the whole process. And sure enough, he's been up in Arlington for almost 2 months, and it's a fantastic job. It's a great company, and I'm so I'm so pleased that he listened to us and went to this thing and found this job, and it's really been great so far.
We always close out with 2 questions. It's the same 2, so I'm going to go ahead and ask you, if you had a chance to go to space today, would you go?
Oh, my goodness. Today? I don't know if I would do it today. If I was able to do it at some point in time, probably. I mean, one thing I didn't mention was that when I was little, I was fascinated by space before I was fascinated by aviation. And we had, back in the day when you used to have people go door to door selling encyclopedias. Like
Yeah.
I remember my parents bought these encyclopedias, and there was one section of them that was all of the planets and all of the details about all of the planets. And I remember on more than one occasion when I was a kid opening up those encyclopedias and just hand writing out all of the why I thought I needed to do that, I couldn't tell you, but I was just so fascinated. So it was just would write all of the planets out, all of the details about it was wild. But yeah, I was very, thought that was really interesting. I mean, I never got an opportunity to go to space camp. That was just not going to be something that, like, we didn't spend a lot of money on stuff like that.
Sure.
But I mean, that would have been fantastic. And I think I was like, I don't know, maybe 11 or 12 when the space camp movie came out, and was just like, oh, this is fantastic. But yeah, I think so. I think that would be fascinating for sure, and it was definitely something that I thought about when I was little.
Then the last question is, if you could give any advice to a young person today who is thinking about a career in aviation or the military or anything like that, what kind of advice would you give?
So, I mean, it seems super cliche to say, study hard, do well in school. I mean, because that's, but you have to, right? You have to show, in order to do any of those things, you've got to have the aptitude to do them first. Yeah. I mean, you've got to have the interest, but you have to have the aptitude to do them. You've got to be very serious about working hard. You've got to set yourself apart from everybody else, which is extremely difficult. And not that you should do things for the sole purpose of getting credit for it necessarily, but you do have to, work hard. And you've got to, and not just do good enough. You got to do better than good enough. Because there's plenty of other people that are doing better than good enough. And it's going to be, you may have 50 people that are qualified. They're only taking this many, then just being qualified is not going to be good enough. But then you've also got to be a very well-rounded person also. So seek out leadership opportunities, seek out service opportunities, and be, by well-rounded, play. And obviously sports aren't for everybody, but being, having that, even if you're not a varsity athlete, you can be a amateur athlete, you can just, but it's going to take, having the physicality is part of, being in space and being in aviation. Yeah. You got to have thick skin, because there's, flight school specifically, there's a lot of, at every level, it's going to be harder and harder and harder and harder. And if you can't handle criticism is maybe the wrong word, but if you can't handle feedback that you don't want to hear, then you're never going to make it. So you got to, don't take things personally, take it for what it is. It's constructive. It's something for you to put in your toolbox and learn from and grow from. Things that are that difficult, you have to want them 150% to succeed. You can't be doing them for somebody else, for sure. And that was one of the things I found at the Naval Academy. There were a handful of folks there that were there because their dad had been there, or their grandfather had been there, or dad and grandfather, multiple generations prior to them had been there, and they didn't really care. They weren't interested in being there. And it showed. And most of them didn't make it because they weren't doing it for them. They were doing it for the wrong reasons. Working hard and then doing all of the other things around, it can't just be school. You got to be the whole person.
I'm waiting for.